Thanks, everybody, for joining us this evening for the Colorado Sun session on peak ozone. We're taking a look back at the ozone season for this summer. Toxic ground level ozone is a health hazard that Colorado and the Front Range counties in particular have been fighting for some time. It's an ongoing fight, and there are differences in seasons. We need to know, was this a particularly bad one? What is being done about it? What people should know about how to handle themselves personally, whether there's something they can do personally to help cut back on Colorado's ozone production. And we have with us two of the top experts in the state who can help us on these questions. And wanted to mention before we get to that the Colorado Sun, as always, is proud to have been awarded a membership in the Trust Project, which is a global transparency standard that proves a news outlet's commitment to original reporting, accuracy, inclusion, and fairness. So our thanks to the Trust Project for including us on that important list. We have with us tonight Michael Ogletree, who is the Air Pollution Control Division Director for the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. Michael also has held similar public health positions regarding air and environmental quality in the city of Denver and in other jobs, and is involved in everything from monitoring to permitting to policy changes. And so it will be one of our key people in looking at how we've done so far. Ozone season is still going on, and what will be happening in the future. We also have with us, and we're grateful for his presence, Mike Silverstein, who is Executive Director of the Regional Air Quality Council, which is a regional policy council that is charged with coming up with solutions for local governments and state government to implement that will attack air pollution in Colorado and ozone in particular. And they have been working on policies that you may have heard about if you're a Colorado Sun reader or reader of any media, like switching lawn and garden equipment to electric as much as possible, to battery powered. And Mike can talk about where we are in that policy. But Mike is day to day just working on policies that are meant to attack our lack of attainment for the EPA's ozone limits. So, Michael, thanks for being with us tonight. Could you talk a little bit about just how we're doing? People, if they have signed up for the alerts, have received, as of our talking, about 49 ozone alerts from the State Department of Health. That seems like a lot. What would you like to tell them about how things have been, what you're seeing, the real-time monitors on Colorado Front Range air?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mike. Really excited to be here and talk a little bit about ozone. For us, we have seen, higher levels of ozone throughout the Front Range this season. We have really experienced a lot of meteorology that's impacted that. We had a really early start to really hot temperatures, really hot and dry temperatures, which have led to the formation of ozone. With regard to the alerts, it's something that the alerts are sent out in advance. So there's some modeling. They look at different meteorological factors and try and identify days in advance. So those alerts get put out earlier. There have been, significant amount of those. And as the season progresses and we validate the data, we'll be able to make a better assessment of what actually happened on those days. But those are proactive so that we can be protective and people know in advance of those higher ozone days so they can do what they need to protect their health.
And real quickly, for people who are interested in this particular thing for their family, what should they do if they get an alert that day, if it looks like numbers are going to be really high?
Yeah, and there's a couple of things they can do to both protect their health as well as reduce the amount of ozone that is in the air. So to protect their health, really take a look at what those levels are throughout the day. And when possible, maybe doing some activities during the early parts of the days, just because of how the way ozone is formed, it happens later in the day. So maybe do some of that exercise earlier in the day before ozone levels are as high as they could be. Different strategies to reduce individual contributions to ozone. They can do things like combine trips and maybe fuel during later times in the evening when those VOCs that cause and add to the ozone formation won't have that time to mix in the atmosphere. So a couple of different things that they can do to both protect their health as well as protect their contribution to ozone.
Mike Silverstein, thanks for being with us. can you talk about what you see from RAC's perspective on how things have gone this summer, both the alerts, but then also what actually showed up? And we can share, we have the RAC posts every week an update on what the monitors up and down the Front Range are showing in actual ozone readings. And so we can put that up on screen while you talk to go through what the numbers signify and whether they are significant. So yes, in general, how do you feel things have gone this summer?
Well, thank you very much for having me on the program, and appreciate this opportunity. Yeah, we've had a difficult summer for summertime ozone, but it's really not unusual for us to have these kinds of values. We have, as the chart shows, there are a fair number of days where we've had elevated ozone concentrations and some very significant individual values. Some of these values were influenced by wildfire smoke, especially that second half of July. And the wildfire smoke is an additive factor to our already elevated ozone concentrations that we create here locally and that are transported to us, from upwind regions mostly to the west of Colorado. And
Mike,
so
could
these
you remind
values, are concerning. We do our best to, as Michael described, provide the forecasts and the messaging of what individuals can do to reduce their exposure, how they can protect themselves, and also those things they can do to, as individuals, reduce their contributions, such as anti-idling for vehicles and reducing emissions from lawn and garden equipment. You mentioned that in the introduction, to switching to electric or mowing the lawn later in the evening when ozone, those emissions don't have an opportunity to contribute to the high ozone concentrations of that day. And so there's just so many individual things that people can do for reducing their trips, their vehicle trips, the carpooling and riding transit, and just taking those individual actions are very important. But the data itself is, in our recent past, it's pretty typical of what we experience, and the number of alerts that are issued by the state are very helpful in helping us at the Regional Air Quality Council message to our public what they can do, and either to again reduce their exposure or to reduce their individual contributions.
Michael, could you, if people are looking at that chart, remind us just a very basic question of where do we want to be? What is the EPA limit and why is it at that limit? People who don't have to study this every day may not know what a 90 means and whether that's bad or not. So tell us again where the EPA is requiring us to be and when.
Yeah, so the EPA limit for ozone is currently set at 70 parts per billion. So you'll see on the chart, those that are within that limit are green. There are a few of those, but more in the yellow is the majority of them, and then orange. So it's something where we're just being very sensitive to it and want to be able to provide a more visual representation to allow to better identify where those elevated levels are.
And what is the EPA policy if we're not consistently at 70 by a certain time? Could you walk us through what time we're talking about, when we need to be under these limits, and what happens if we don't?
Yeah, so EPA sets these standards and they change them. So they are required to reevaluate those over a period of time. In the past couple of years, they lowered the standard from 75 parts per billion to 70 parts per billion. So that had us reclassify just because of the data to a more severe ozone non-attainment area. And what that does, those are setting thresholds whereby which we would change our permitting such that those sources that were previously smaller sources are now bigger sources, or identified or classified in a different way, so that we do have more stringent permitting requirements and emissions control requirements for a larger number of facilities to help reduce those ozone precursors.
So, for example, maybe an oil and gas drilling pad that before was not subject to those limits or for certain permitting requirements. Now, because we have not attained these levels, a larger share of those have to seek a permit and get review from your office. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So those thresholds are set at 25 tons per year of VOCs or 25 tons per year of NOx, whereas previously they were higher. So if, let's say, a facility previously was at 30, they wouldn't have been subject to those, but now with the lower threshold, now they are required to do that. It's also a way to incentivize some facilities who are able to actually reduce their emissions below that threshold. So it has created a way for facilities who would previously be above that threshold to take tighter permit requirements, thereby further decreasing ozone so that they wouldn't be subject to some of those additional requirements because they're voluntarily lowering their emissions.
Okay. Mike, I am very likely to mangle this, so I'm helping you will jump in and correct me. But as I understand it, there is a window of a number of years that we have to start getting these numbers under more control. Can you talk a little bit about that from RAC's perspective and from a policymaking perspective, how much time we have to do better on these numbers?
Well, sure. We kind of have two approaches. The first would be the administrative approach, which I think you're alluding to. We have until 2027 to demonstrate that our ozone values achieve 70 parts per billion or less. And it's a 3-year averaging period, which it's called the form of the standard that EPA issues. So it's a 3-year average of the fourth maximum concentration. So that's why this chart is constructed the way it is when we look at that fourth max value towards the middle and towards the right of the chart, those are the values that say count from this administrative perspective. So when you look at the fourth max values for each year, and for each of the 3-year period, you average it, you come up with what's called the design value or your attainment value. And so that's the final column here on the right. How are we doing in that 3-year average, kind of looking at past years? But as you mentioned, we're under the EPA requirements to show attainment by 2027. And so we'll be looking at 24, 25, and 26. And so looking at our 2024 values, we're not starting off well. We need to have much lower values over the next 2 years to have a chance to get to 70 parts per billion. And so that's why it's important.
If you're a fantasy football player looking at this chart, you'd think, we've blown it for this year. We got to make a big comeback next year. Is that fair way of looking at it?
I think it is fair. Meteorology drives so much of what we were talking about with ozone. Emissions don't change dramatically year to year, but our weather can. And so we might have had more favorable meteorology in, say, 23 or 22, the same level of emissions, because our activities don't change that dramatically year to year. There are some subtle changes that can occur. But if we have, intense meteorology next year, like we had this past summer, especially the month of July and in late June, then it's going to be very difficult. So what we're looking at the Regional Air Quality Council is how do we find the right emission reduction package where we can demonstrate that we're going to begin monitoring compliant level ozone in 2026 and beyond. So 2027 again is this administrative deadline with EPA and the form of the standard. But if as we know, we can't dramatically reduce emissions year to year. We have no control over the weather. So we have to look a little longer term, especially, we have a short-term goal of 2026, 27 to achieve some pretty significant change so we can have a chance to measure compliance. But also it's a public health issue. We want to see, compliant level ozone all the time. And so irregardless of the EPA standards and how we construct our plans and make our recommendations to the state agencies, we really are all about reducing emissions in the near term so we can improve public health, reduce our public's exposure to elevated ozone concentrations. And that's why we need to implement strategies as soon as we can, whether they're regulatory or voluntary or incentive-based. And that's the part of the mission of the Regional Air Quality Council.
Michael, is this chart on the wall at the Air Quality Control Commission to promote some urgency? I mean, should people be looking at this and feeling more urgency? Mike mentioned meteorology. Climate change science tells us that's not getting any better anytime soon. We're only likely to have more hot days, baking VOCs and NOx and wildfire smoke, if we get it, into more ozone. So should this create more urgency?
Yeah, I mean, this is the screensaver for my computer. No, but seriously, I mean, this is something that we, very specifically pay attention to on a regular basis. We act with urgency on all of our rules. For us, it's something that we do at the Air Division. We're the ones who are putting the rules together and putting them in front of the AQCC for adoption, and are really working as much as we can and as fast as we can to put rules in place that'll continue to drive reductions in ozone precursors and as a result, ozone concentrations across the Front Range in particular.
If we could also put up, we have another chart that I wanted you guys to talk about, as we also include some reader questions along the way. But we wanted to talk about what makes up the ozone on an average given day, because that's the rub, right? EPA can put on a limit, but what makes up 70 parts per billion? And is it controllable? Is it something that is an actionable number? And where is it actionable? So, Mike, if you could talk first about, because you and I have talked about this chart before and some specific policies that are aimed at different parts of this chart. So tell people what this means and what they should be looking at. What pops out, because this is an argument from oil and gas interests and other folks who do not want big policy changes, is that Colorado has a big background and natural level of ozone that is just on any given day. We wake up in the morning and we're almost at 49 when the limit is 70. So what does the background and natural ozone mean for future policy changes?
Okay, thank you. Just a general comment first about this chart. This chart was constructed a number of years ago based on an analysis of older data. So I just want your viewing audience to understand that this should be taken in context. That we show very what I would call precise numbers on this chart. 8.6 parts per billion or 6.8. And these are in parts per billion. So that's a very it seems like a very precise indicator. But what I would like your audience to take away from this is there are numerous sources that contribute to these to the emissions that cause our summertime ozone problem, and within each category itself, there's a lot of information, and so we can drill down into this chart and kind of tease it apart to understand what industrial or human activities are contributing how much. And that's an area of debate, because this is an analysis that's based on modeling and assumptions and some measured information, but mostly calculated information. So with that said, this background and natural component, it's really important. It's, I kind of use a rule of thumb. It's about 2/3 of the ozone is given to us and 1/3 is homegrown. And that's a very general reference point for me, but it indicates, just how difficult our problem is, because if we're handed ozone levels at about 50 parts per billion and the standard is 70, we don't have a lot of control over our destiny. But then I look around at regions outside of the Denver metro, and they're in compliance with the ozone standard. And so they're not violating, they're not exceeding. So that tells me that we have enough activity in our region that pushes us over the top. So this background to natural is a combination of the vegetation that naturally emits the precursors to ozone, the transport of emissions and ozone from our upwind neighbors. We have a global ozone background concentration that, you put a monitor in the middle of a remote area or in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and you find ozone. And so we're all contributing to each other's ozone problems around the world. And in Colorado, we're a receptor of our neighbors, and it's a high background. And in the Rocky Mountain West, with our elevation and our topography, we tend to have even a higher background than other areas might have. And so that's the problem we're faced with is we can't control this background. We don't have we don't have influence over what we're receiving, and we're counting on our upwind neighbors to reduce emissions as they're required to do under the federal regulation and law. And then with efficiency and other programs around the world, we're seeing ozone precursor emissions drop in many areas. So that can help us. But what we do have control over is the other categories here as listed on the chart.
I just want to mention that we could be playing the Blame Canada background music for that part of Background and Natural, or Blame Utah. And we should mention that the Supreme Court recently prevented the EPA from carrying out a policy that it was trying to implement about the good neighbor or bad neighbor policy, where states that are upwind, and in our case, they have identified Utah as being an upwind producer of air pollution, including precursors of ozone, with power plants in eastern Utah and oil and gas drilling there that drifts into Colorado. Other states obviously are contributors. Pennsylvania is a contributor to other states east of them on the East Coast. But the Supreme Court said the EPA did not have the power to enforce those good neighbor policies. So that was one potential policy area I think that was taken away. And we've written about that in The Sun, and we hope people will go there to find that. Michael, what part of this chart, understanding Mike's point that this is relative, it's not as precise as this would make it seem, but we can see relative contributions of, say, driving versus lawn and garden equipment versus oil and gas production. What part of the chart would you like to concentrate on? Would you like to explain to folks?
Yeah, for me, this chart is a good reflection of the required multi-sector approach that we've taken to address all of these areas that we do have within our control and within our authority. We've looked at oil and gas regs. We've looked at vehicles and different point sources. So for me, this represents a good view of even the Air Commission's calendar, right? And how we've taken a multi-sector approach, and over the past couple of years have passed rules and regulations that target all of these different areas, because it isn't just one thing or another. This chart is a good reflection that it's a blend of everything. So we are looking at all of these different areas and finding ways to reduce ozone precursors in all of these different sectors.
The top section on oil and gas production, there are currently talks going on a different commission, the Energy and Carbon Management Commission, a widespread series of regulations about siting and emissions control. One of the questions that has come up is, because of the summer months, should there be a pause on drilling activity and production activity that creates ozone precursors? Can you, Michael or Mike, either one of you, talk about where that idea stands, whether it's something that people have reached a consensus on, or if it's if it's considered too much of an attack on oil and gas economic activity in Colorado?
From my perspective, I think we need to think about every possible way we can to reduce ozone concentrations. So for us, we evaluate, any of these ideas that people bring to the legislature or that are brought forth by the Regional Air Quality Council, in taking everything into account and everything's on the table. So for us, as we look to evaluate these different things, we look at the value, we look at economic impacts, ways we can implement them. So for me, really, everything is things we should look at. There's no more low-hanging fruit. So it's something that we continue to evaluate different ways, options, rules, regulations, legislation that would be able to continue to reduce ozone precursors.
Mike, do you want to talk more about the lawn and garden slice and why you've been working on that, and what people should expect? Will it affect the average viewer, or maybe an institution that they work for anytime soon?
Well, the lawn and garden piece, it's a kind of a good example of this kind of summertime pause using an analogy of we have a carrying capacity for air pollution in our region, and we're over that capacity. We're in non-attainment area, and we have a geography, a topography, a meteorological regime that is very conducive to air pollutants building up. And it's a summertime issue. We don't have wintertime ozone. It's a summertime issue just because of the atmospheric chemistry and sunlight and our emissions. And so to look at seasonal strategies that can be deployed, we've done that with lawn and garden equipment. At the Regional Air Quality Council, we've operated for many years incentive programs where we try to induce the average person to give up the gas mower, recycle it, and go electric, and help with the costs of that. And we're always in the fundraising mode of how do we gain real dollars to incentivize that transition to electric, where the electric equipment is just as viable and in many cases outperforms the gas equipment without the emissions. And so that's a really strong area, because lawn and garden, surprisingly, is a very, very important category in the, as a contributor to summertime ozone. And the Regional Air Quality Council developed and worked with the Air Division a year ago to advance regulatory approaches to the use of gas-powered equipment in the summer months. Not to affect how landscape operations or parks and recs departments, golf course managers take care of their properties throughout the year. But during the summer months, a proposal was advanced and approved by the Commission, where state agencies and local governments on a schedule could no longer use certain gas-powered equipment just in the summer months. And so that would then drive, well, they still have to mow the lawn and get work done. And so what could they do? Well, go electric. And we have had resources to help pave the way and help with the financial transition to electric. So that's an example of a summertime effort that we deployed the strategy when we need it, and there's summertime kind of pauses or mitigation approaches for all of these various categories that we're looking into at the Regional Air Quality Council, partnering with our local governments and state agencies to find appropriate approaches to make that difference when we need to make the difference.
So we have a lot of reader questions asking, why not go harder, faster? So, for example, in lawn and garden equipment, did the different groups who are considering this policy consider an outright ban for public sale of oil and gas-based lawn equipment for use in the summertime? And if that was rejected at some point, why is that too difficult? Why wouldn't that do more?
Well, I'll go first. That was part of the Regional Air Quality Council's proposal a year ago to the State Air Quality Control Commission, where we advanced with board approval an approach to prohibit the sale of gas-powered equipment, certain equipment, push mowers, handheld equipment on a specific date going forward. And that proposal was brought to the State Commission, and the Commission felt that it wasn't appropriate at the time to deploy such a strategy. But they directed their staff at the Air Division to further evaluate the idea of a sales prohibition and report back. So it's on the table. It just wasn't approved last year.
Michael, you in your dealings with the commission, there's often a lot of back and forth about recommendations and what the statewide commission is ready for and what they're not ready for. Can we talk a bit about what staff discussion or staff recommendations have been on another big slice, which is on-road vehicles? People understand that they're driving a fossil fuel-based car contributes to this somehow. Can you talk a little bit about what contribution that amounts to, and whether switching to public transit can make a big dent in that if it's done in large enough proportions, whether state policies encouraging switches to electric vehicles can make a dent in that anytime soon, and is there a constant debate about whether to go farther on that particular slice of the contribution?
Yeah. So, vehicles both on-road and off-road are significant contributors. Similar to taking a multi-sector approach more broadly, even within these sectors, looking at the different areas we can to improve emissions. So things like electrifying school buses, incentivizing the use of public transit, expanding public transit, and continuing to electrify our more broad fleet of vehicles that are going in and around the Denver area. So it's something that we're looking at all of those different areas. We passed in the past couple of years Colorado Clean Cars, which set targets to improve adoption of electric vehicles. As we look at all of these different rules and ways to improve air quality from transportation, we look at not only how we can improve air quality, but how we can do it in a sustainable way. Passing rules that, let's think about lawn and garden as an example, but passing rules where the actual technology may not be where it is yet, or there isn't enough equipment to, satisfy the market when we're talking about a full ban or something like that. It's something where we need to understand the economy behind what is possible as we pass rules that would be implementable, so that we're not passing rules that we can't actually meet those targets. So in the transportation sector, really looking at ways that we can have goals and targets that are not only aggressive, but that we can actually meet, so that we can ensure that we're not having to enforce against a rule that wasn't possible to implement. And our stakeholdering in advance of all of these rules gets at a lot of those different nuances in how rules are passed.
How significant a switch would there need to be to mass public transit from single drivers to make a dent in air pollution? I know there's other reasons to promote that policy goal of more mass transit, but particularly on the questions of pollution, how much of a switch in the big population does there need to be to make a difference?
I don't have specific numbers on that. So as I think about what needs to be done, I think we need to think in terms of what's the most we can do, right? Because that's going to be the limiting factor. How much can we actually do? How can we each take our own ways to improve air quality by reducing single occupancy vehicles and vehicle miles traveled? And how can we as individuals adopt public transit? And from a regulatory side, how can we provide those incentives, those opportunities for the larger community to be able to really adopt those and be as aggressive as we all can be to be able to collectively improve air quality?
And if I might add, Mike, when we look at this chart, for example, there's not one strategy that is our silver bullet. If we eliminated all of the vehicle traffic on our roads, we would achieve 7 parts per billion, approximately, according to this chart. Again, with caveats about accuracy of this modeling, but it wouldn't solve our problem. Or to eliminate all of the oil and gas emissions in a one fell swoop, we still would be above the standard. And so your question about transit and on-road vehicles, it's a very difficult area, because we all have vehicles. We all love our cars. We drive our cars. We want the convenience of those vehicles. And it's tough to change these habits. And so our education and outreach programs and our incentive and regulatory efforts are designed to do the best we can to get people to give up a trip, to skip a trip, to carpool, or to jump on transit when they can, or make transit part of their daily routine. But people are people, and we're really addicted to our vehicles. And I have two cars, and we use them, and it's just the way our urban landscape is designed, our desire to recreate and to have those convenience of vehicles. And so to try to encourage transit, for example, it's really important to have transit be a foundational part of our system. But studies have shown that if we filled up the trains and we filled up the buses, it would still have a very minor impact on our total vehicle miles traveled every day. We would need a dramatic effort. You look at big urban areas, and they have wonderful transit systems and millions of riders, and their streets are still clogged with cars, and they're still ozone non-attainment. And so it's a tough nut. And this electrification of our transportation system over time is really a solution. That's really going to make that difference. But that's a generation from now as we electrify over time. And so we need to look for incentives and opportunities to reduce this on-road vehicle component using transit and other approaches to do the best we can. Because
so
as
you're
Michael
telling me
did say, how do you enforce a program on that's relying on our habits? It's a very difficult regulatory path to take.
So I'm not hearing you saying you're in favor of a congestion pricing plan for downtown Denver or downtown Greeley or Fort Collins.
Downtown's not the problem.
Okay.
It's the suburbs. Downtown, okay. It's I-25 is full whether they're going into I-20 or to downtown or not, and I-70. It's the suburban traffic. That's where you see the emissions and so the emphasis on a downtown area. That's just not our landscape here. Go into Douglas County and go into Larimer and Weld County and see the amount of driving that occurs on a regular basis, or out in Aurora, long distance trips that compared to, say, downtown Denver is just a very minor, part of our problem.
And COVID changed all that, of course, too, even more.
Absolutely. Downtown's not as busy from the commuter perspective. Downtown's busy from a recreation perspective, that's for sure.
We built a robust hub and spoke system for light rail and other transit, and then COVID really pulled the rug out, and people's changing commuting patterns really pulled the rug out from some of those plans. And people I know are still regrouping at the policy level on how to handle all that. Michael, is it fair to say that, we're talking a lot about carrots in this, rebates for electric vehicles, very lucrative rebates. You can get a car for half off right now, or a very good electric vehicle if you stack all of these things together. Denver has given away vouchers that have actually been used for 9,000 e-bikes as part of its climate change program. But we don't do. Is it fair to say that the governor and other people at top agencies are not into the stick part of that? That a lot of these policies are not designed to force people to do things. Is that because people are convinced that doesn't work, or that it's just there's too much resistance in trying to get something like that passed?
I think it's challenging to pass requirements for people to drive vehicles, any specific type of vehicle. And one of the reasons I would offer is that everyone's situations are unique. I have 4 kids. I need a larger vehicle to take them all to any specific place. Some people like to camp, and so they, tow their vehicles different places. Some people live further away from the metro and don't have easy access to things like charging always at their home, maybe. So I think having requirements for something like people to require people to drive electric vehicles, I think it's a challenge because everyone is different and unique, and we need to have ways that address those needs of individuals while still incentivizing the wider scale adoption. And the methods that we've taken are about vehicle sales and requiring, sales of those vehicles at the manufacturer's level, at levels that we know are achievable to be able to further incentivize it. And the data has shown that that has increased adoption of electric vehicles. So, that's the approach we've taken and the why behind that, to provide people with options and opportunities while still, increasing adoption of electric vehicles.
Mike, you're convening local policymakers all the time and local lawmakers all the time. How do you feel the discussion goes in terms of talking about carrots versus sticks, and whether there's appetite for more sticks, more requirements for folks that also might be more expensive at a time when we're talking about a lot of inflation?
Well, it has to be a combination, as Michael said. There's opportunities out there. With our work at the RAC, we're looking for those source categories where there is opportunity. There's either under-controlled or even uncontrolled emissions that we can get at. So they may be small in comparison to the larger picture, but they're emissions that are out there that have a viable path for reduction. So whether it's from an industrial sector, it's from oil and gas, it's from our transportation network, we're looking for those opportunities. With non-road vehicles, that was a big category from that chart. That's off-road equipment. That's really the combustion of diesel fuel in industrial and commercial activities like construction or earth moving, whatever that might be. There's very various degrees of uncontrolled or under-controlled emissions where we have to figure out how can we develop incentive or voluntary or maintenance or best management practice approaches that may not be regulatory, but that we can gain some emission reductions from that area, because that's a very important category. Because there's, as Michael said, there's not a lot of low-hanging fruit out there. They're all difficult decisions going forward. There are large facilities that attract our attention, whether it's they're attracting our vehicle trips to them, or they're generating vehicle trips into our roadways by the nature of their work, such as like home delivery of products, or the transport of goods from here and there, or recreation activities that we all go to that, guess what, we're all driving 20,000 of us to a concert in downtown Denver on one particular night, or many to a Broncos game or to a Rockies game. So we're looking at opportunities there where we can open discussions with these sources that are either attracting or generating trips, to see if there are ways that we can put a cap to that. How do we not get more trips than we already have, and actually reduce the emissions from trips, whether they're there or not? So it's all about emissions. The vehicle trips themselves are important, but it's the emissions that are caused by those trips, and how can we reduce those emissions in a reasonable way in short order? Because as I've mentioned, we have until 2027 to get to compliance. We have until now to improve public health. And so where can we find short-term emission reductions that can complement the longer-term emission reductions that have already been approved by the state that just take time to implement?
And yeah, I think it's important to remind consumers that that package didn't show up on their doorstep. It's not arriving by drone as of yet. It's arriving by a truck, and it took a bunch of other trucks to get it to the warehouse before it ever came to your house. So consumers, I think, can have a role. If they are expecting a case of Diet Coke delivered in 2 hours, maybe they need to go tell Walmart and Amazon that they are in favor of electric trucks and electric vans, and they will push for that in the future and use their profits to work on that.
Or combined delivery instead of a daily drop off. You pick a day or two a week if that's how you shop, and so many of us shop like that. I do, but I'm going to pick one day a week where I'm going to get everything delivered that I've ordered. So there are ways to do it without, regulatorily requiring, Amazon or FedEx or UPS to change, but for all of us to incorporate, best practices in our daily habits.
Okay. Before we wrap up, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about a success story after talking about ozone quite a bit. Michael, I haven't had a chance to talk to you about that yet, so this is your chance to talk to our listeners and readers about carbon monoxide. Colorado has had some success that it hasn't achieved yet on ozone, but it has on carbon monoxide. So you tell us what has changed recently about our carbon monoxide emissions and where we are in alignment with rules on that.
Yeah, so over a decade ago, we had issues with carbon monoxide, and this past month at the AQCC, we were able to finally overcome that hurdle. We've been in an attainment area for carbon monoxide for some time, and now we've kind of we've passed that hurdle, and now we are in full compliance and no longer having to really work hard to continue to decrease carbon monoxide. So that it really is a success story, and for me, I think it kind of goes to show that it is possible to make these changes. And if you look at ozone trends over the past couple of decades, we continue to see downward trends. And it's something that we just need to continue to work as hard as we can so that, hopefully in, a few years from now, we will, continue to decrease ozone and start coming into compliance more holistically. So for me, it shows that it is possible to make some of these changes, and something that I'm looking forward to the day when we can have a rulemaking in front of the Air Quality Control Commission where we can say, hey, we've done everything we can, and now we're in compliance with ozone. So I think it's something I'm looking forward to with ozone, and right now really celebrating with carbon monoxide.
Mike, do you want to mention, was RAC involved in carbon monoxide efforts over the years?
Absolutely. The RAC, as the lead planning agency for the Front Range region, helped develop the carbon monoxide plans back in the 1990s. I wasn't at RAC. I was actually at the division working on these hand in glove with the RAC, as we do now with Michael and his team on ozone, on developing our plans. And so we developed plans and programs that were controversial at the time, whether it was oxygenated gasoline or the inspection maintenance program that we still operate today. Those were all put in place because of carbon monoxide. And Denver had the highest carbon monoxide readings in the 1970s and 1980s. It just kind of reiterates our general problem with air quality in our region, that we have this environment that is perfect for the buildup of pollutants, whether it's carbon monoxide or ozone or something else. And it takes emission control programs to solve the problem. And so these controversial programs and new vehicle technology, that was the biggest component. The turnover of the old 1960s and 70s vehicles to the 80s and 90s and our present vehicle fleet, just really made the difference. And so it takes an effort by the federal agencies and the state government and locals and volunteers and others and our public to make that difference. But it is a great success story that for 20 years we haven't measured elevated levels of carbon monoxide anywhere in the state. We had carbon monoxide problems up and down the Front Range, including, Greeley and Fort Collins and Colorado Springs and Longmont. And so developing these plans, putting them in place, monitoring and making sure that emissions kept going down and down over time gave us this great success story. So as Michael said, we have that same opportunity with ozone, and I think we can make that difference with our hard work.
Mike Silverstein from the Regional Air Quality Council, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. Michael Ogletree, Air Pollution Control Division Director, appreciate your time as well for all of your great information and the work that you put in on these air pollution issues for Colorado. And we just want to remind our viewers to sign up for a full day of conversations like this about everything from air pollution to water resources in the state to education at our September 27th SunFest with our partners at the University of Denver. You can go to coloradosun.com/events to sign up for those tickets, and we hope you will. We look forward to seeing you in person. We appreciate our panelists online and look forward to seeing more people in person. So, Michael and Mike, thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.